Today's an extraordinary day in the life of the church. Typically, Sundays are not taken over by certain feast days, but this is one of the times that this particular feast day overtakes the Sunday in ordinary time. So today we celebrate the Exaltation of the Holy Cross, or sometimes called the Triumph of the Cross. Now, it seems like a misnomer. It seems like something contradictory. We exalt something that's so evil and kind of ugly. And so it's good for us to explain why we call this the Exaltation of the Cross. There's some historical things that have happened that brought about this feast, kind of beginning with St. Helen. And I think this is an important story for us to know as Catholics, to know the beginnings of this feast day. And there's some historical things later that happened in which the feast ultimately got planted in the liturgical calendar and celebrated. But it began with the finding of the cross. It was actually St. Helen, Constantine's mother, who found the cross after she converted to Christianity. She made a pilgrimage to Jerusalem, and in Jerusalem she knew the hill or the mountain upon which Christ was crucified. She went to the mountain looking for the cross itself, knowing that historically, especially before big feast days, they would quickly get rid of the crosses by just burying them nearby where the crucifixion happened. And so she looked in those spots. She found 3 crosses that we hear about in the Bible. And so she took a piece of each of those crosses into town, found the sick in Jerusalem, laid a piece of the cross on the sick, and whichever piece healed the people, that's how she knew it was the cross of Christ. So began our celebration of this feast, the Exaltation of the Cross. So why would we exalt the cross? Why would we triumph in the cross? When we look at the cross, it's, as I said, lots of evil in the cross, very painful, the piercing or the nailing of the feet, the nailing of the wrists, going through the nerves, causing much pain, the person on the cross having to lift themselves up to breathe, and so having to put more pain on their feet just to lift themselves up so their lungs could catch air. Very, very painful death. Why would we exalt that? We would not exalt any other cross except for the cross of Jesus Christ, because of what Jesus Christ won for us, the fact that he won our salvation for us, and that his cross that happens in time affects all of eternity. And so whenever we come to Mass, we, in a mysterious way, enter into the cross, enter into the Last Supper, and enter into the resurrection so that we can receive the fullness of who Christ is, so that we can receive that redemption ourselves. This Feast of the Exaltation of the Cross comes at a very interesting time in our calendar here in these first few weeks of the school year here in America, as we've had multiple shooting threats on college campuses. Many of them were false, some of them were real. We've had a Catholic school shooting in Minneapolis. We had the murder of Charlie Kirk this last week, political activist. And on the same day, actually, there was a school shooting in Evergreen, Colorado that got overshadowed by Charlie Kirk's death. And so just these many, many things that have gone on in the life of our diocese. A couple things happened as well. Father Vincent Hoxie has developed a chronic condition in which he is going to go back to Burma permanently, and he will be leaving our diocese at the end of October, which means that we will be taking on Hoxie and Seguin as well, and keeping Angeles and Oakley as well. So there will be 5 parishes that the 3 of us priests will be covering. And then also we had a priest in our diocese that was suspended this last week, which means that he cannot present himself as a priest. So he was a pastor somewhere, and now we have an empty gap that we don't have anyone for. And so it's caused a lot of movement in the last week and a half or so that we didn't know was going to have to happen. And so it's just caused a lot of issues. So what is going on in our world? Why is our world the way it is? Why do we have this evil that is in the world? Why was Jesus crucified? Well, we have to go back all the way to the beginning. We have to go back to Adam and Eve. When we see that Adam and Eve, when they are presented with the option of the tree of life or the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and God tells them, do not eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, or you will die. And so they are tempted by the serpent. The serpent tells them that God's a liar, that God's holding back from them. They believe the serpent. They see that the tree is good for food, to delight to the eyes, and it's good to know good and evil. And the serpent also says, "You will become like God." All lies. They already knew that the tree was good. They knew it was beautiful. God created it. They knew it was. They knew everything about it. They were already in the image and likeness of God. They didn't need to eat of the tree. But the serpent convinced them. It became so alluring to them. The temptation was so alluring to them, and that the fact that someone might be holding something back from them was so alluring to them that they ate of it, and evil entered into the world. And we see this evil even playing out in Adam and Eve's children's family, where Cain and Abel, we know the story of Cain and Abel, where Cain kills Abel because he is jealous of the sacrifice and the acknowledgement of God of Abel's sacrifice and not of Cain's. And so he kills Abel. And the story of human history is the fact that evil enters into the world. Evil doesn't exist. It's not the same power as good. We have to remember that there's not God and then some evil force that's just as powerful God. It's not the force and the dark side. That's not what it is. It's God and the evil, which is a privation of the good. If evil actually what existed in the way that good exists and that God exists, then God wouldn't be God. And so God is all goodness, and any time that evil comes into the world, it's because the fullness of the good has been, something's absent from the fullness of the good. And so that's how evil enters in. And it happens in our lives all the time. And so this plays out in our world today. It plays out in our world today where we see these goods and people have this distorted idea of what good is, and they enter into evil. And many times people do evil because they think it's the good. They think it's the good thing to do, and that's how distorted things get. You know, our country was founded on Christian foundations, and there was a time everywhere you went, Christianity was the solid force. There's been bad forms of that Christianity. There was the Ku Klux Klan, who were often Christian men who believed that they were doing the right thing. They were doing these evil things even though they believed that they were right. And so evil things have come through Christianity even in our own country. This Christianity was so enforced in our country that it was taught in schools. There was the eternal truth that was taught in schools, and all schools taught this. However, we have to remember that the original public schools were anti-Catholic. Let's always remember that. And so Catholic schools were started because the public schools wouldn't let the Catholics in, or they persecuted the Catholics if they did let them in. And so Catholics had to start their own schools. Let us always remember that true history. And so the public schools, even though they allowed Christ in, they were still persecuting others. And they taught the eternal truths. They were always headed towards God. And then a period of time happened, 70s and 80s, where, even when my dad went to public school, this is an interesting thing. Not all public schools were that way, by the way. But my dad went to public school in Angeles. He was taught by the sisters. They went to Mass at like 7:30 in the morning. After Mass, they'd go back to school. They'd have their catechism classes, and then they'd begin their normal school day. That was his experience of public school up to, what grade was it? 8th grade, I think, that Angeles had all the way back then. But what happened in the 70s and 80s? Well, we went from that kind of ideal of education, which we recognized that education had this telos. And this telos was Christ. It was our God himself, the eternal truth. It was God himself. And so we, in a sense, lost our telos. We no longer believed that God was the end, and this kind of thought entered into our education systems and entered into our books and our styles of teaching and all of these things in which we began and in which we're filling young people's minds and so this type of education is called a virtues-based education that was about the true, the good, and the beautiful, that ended up in the eternal truth, the good, eternal good, the eternal beautiful, who is God himself, and all of these things leading to that. It went to this values-based type of education in which, whatever you feel is right is right. And there's a world of difference between those two types of education, the underlying theme and the underlying systematic way of teaching. Well, there's an eternal truth that we know and that we always have to find, versus that whatever feels right to you. And yeah, we still teach math and we still get 2 + 2 is 4 and those sorts of things, but we can't tell someone that they're wrong in these other areas of education, because, well, that's what they feel is right. And this became systemic all the way through education. It affects even Catholic schools. And there's colleges and universities and Catholic schools, high schools and elementary schools still today that are influenced by this type of education. We can see how those types of schools work. And they've basically thrown God out, where God is very distant from their way of education. Whereas a true Catholic Christian education is one in which God is the center and everything leads to God. A values-based type of education puts the human person as the center and everything leads to the human person. And when we put myself or yourself or this individual as the center, and this idea of the human person being the center is the I, the ego, myself, in the center, and everything is focused on me. What does that do? But causes me to be God. It makes me God, ultimately, if everything is leading to me. And so it's a sort of idolatry that has entered in where the I, the ego, has taken hold, and this person becomes the center of everything. And what happens is when we make ourselves the center of everything, what happens? Well, mental health begins to be a serious, serious problem when we think that everything is ordered towards us and everything is inwards instead of everything being outwards. It's the complete opposite of what God tells us. It's the complete opposite of what Scripture tells us. It's the complete opposite of what we know to be true, that everything is outside of us, that we are meant to pour ourselves out, not to put everything in, but to pour ourselves out and pour ourselves out in love to one another. And when we change from this type of education to this kind of education, we get all of these problems that we have today where, well, you've offended me, so now I'm going to get mad at you and get angry with you. And because you've hurt my feelings, I don't know how to deal with hurt feelings. And so I'm going to punch you, or I'm going to murder you, or I'm going to shoot you, or whatever it is. This stuff happens. And I think all of us are influenced by that. And many people hide behind their computers and their phones, and they find all this stuff on the internet to just continue to feed their self, instead of going outside of themselves and seeking God and seeking the truths of who we are as a human person, and seeking the truths of what God tells us is true, good, and beautiful. And so we run into all of these problems. And when someone comes up against us and challenges our values-based truth, where I am the center of everything, and when you tell me that something is wrong, and they tell me that violence is the answer because I've always been taught that you can't tell me I'm wrong, then we end up where we are today. We end up where we are today. That's the conclusion. That's the telos of when we put the ego, the I, in the center, and we worship the ego, the I, and the values base. Whereas whatever makes you feel good is the right way to go, instead of a virtues base which looks towards God and looks towards these eternal truths and recognizes these things that are outside of us, which we seek with our whole being. Telos means the end to which we are created for. I should have clarified that. It's a Greek word that means in philosophy that they use to talk about the end for what we are created for. We know we are created for God. We are created in His image and likeness. We are created to live out the teachings of God that we hear about in the Scriptures and our tradition, and we are called to serve our neighbor, to love God and to love our neighbor. Yes, loving ourselves is part of that, but not loving ourselves in which we are the center of everything. Loving our neighbor, loving God, and loving ourselves to God. Loving ourselves in God's eyes, that humility to think not to think less of ourselves, but think of ourselves less. And so that's where we are today. The good news is Christianity is on an uptick in our country. There's studies that are showing there's this huge increase in graphs of people converting to Christ and converting to following this lifestyle in Christ Himself. For instance, the campus center, St. Mary's Campus Center at Texas A&M University in College Station, Texas, They have 2 OCIA classes, and in one of their OCIA classes, a couple weeks ago, they had 150 people show up for OCIA. Remember that Texas A&M's, I think they have 50, 60, 70, might even be more than that, students on campus. So they had 150 people at OCIA on their first night. They had a second class that same week. They had 250 people show up to that one. They have 400 people in OCIA in Texas at St. Mary's at College Station. We in our parish, we had, at the beginning of this year, we had 7 people knock on my door and say, Father, I want to become Catholic. And then I had some people come along later and say, Father, I haven't been confirmed. I want to be confirmed. So in a couple weeks, we'll confirm 3 people. They're baptized Catholic, need confirmation. In November, on Christ the King Sunday, we will bring into full communion with the Catholic Church 6 people who, maybe it's 7. The reason my numbers are mixed up because there's one that we brought that had OCIA a couple years ago that we're bringing in because they had some marriage things that we needed to get straightened out, and so we're bringing that one in. So now I can't remember if my number is 6 or 7. Doesn't matter. It's more than we've had in a long time, and the very exciting thing, we've got 3 more in our OCIA class for this next year. So just some exciting things even happening in our own parish, and so that's the good news. The bad news is it's going to get worse. As we continue to see the effects of putting myself at the center of everything, and the results of that are still they're still happening. They're still going to come, and so we haven't seen the end of this yet until there's a countrywide, worldwide turning to Christ and giving their lives over to Christ. So there's been some evil things that have happened, and unfortunately, we're going to continue to see them. Satan still exists. Evil still enters in. Satan's still working to tempt people, and so we know that this evil is going to continue. So what is our response? Pray. Pray, 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 pray. Prayer works. As much as maybe we don't see it work, prayer transforms us. It makes us available to God. It makes us humble. It makes us available to other people. Secondly, fast. This is the part of prayer that I think, unfortunately, our church has kind of forgotten about, how powerful fasting is. Did you know that canon law still says that on Fridays we are required to do an act of penance? Canon law says that every Friday is a day of penance. The tradition is to give up meat on Fridays. If you don't give up meat, you can substitute it for another form of penance. That's what canon law says. It doesn't say, well, if you feel like it. That's not what it says. It says you must do some form of penance. In fact, the precepts of the church, one of the precepts of the church is to follow the days of fasting and absence in church. So every Friday is a day of penance. We're required to follow it. So we need to be following that. I think the easiest way is just give up meat on Fridays. It's the norm. It's easy to do that. If we can't give up meat, then we need to do something else. If we don't, in fact, it's actually because the church says that we need to be doing it. If we don't do it, we actually sin when we don't do it, when we aren't obedient to the church. So really take that into account and make sure that we are doing that on Fridays. So we need to be fasting, doing penance. Even outside of Fridays, how are we disciplining ourselves to make us realize that we are not the center of the universe? What are we doing to serve others? What are we doing for corporal and spiritual works of mercy? What are we doing to fast and to pray? Thirdly, we have to be aware of our emotions, aware of how we respond to people. I've seen it in my own life. When someone disagrees with me, my immediate reaction in pride is to be angry. And I will respond in anger. I have a little bit of a temper. And so I have to be very aware of that. I have to be very, very aware of that and to humble myself, to calm myself and be able to say, okay, why do you think that way? Why do you believe that? We also have to be humble to be corrected and admit that we are wrong, that we can be wrong, that we aren't right. We have to be humble enough to correct someone when we see a wrong being done and correct them in love. We have to be humble enough to be corrected as well when we are wrong, and humble enough to listen to people and not just respond in anger, not just respond quickly because we think so-and-so stupid because they believe this way. That doesn't help anyone. That doesn't help anyone. I barely know who Charlie Kirk is. Somebody told me about him a couple years ago, and I've seen a few of his shorts or whatever on Facebook, and I saw one this last week. It was incredible. When you see someone that's hostile to Charlie, he'll in some ways be hostile back. When someone legitimately comes forward to ask a legitimate question and is willing to listen, Charlie Kirk was the kindest person to those people. Someone that had completely opposite views as him, and they were willing to listen, and he was willing to listen to them. He would let them lay out all of their points, and then he would challenge them on their points. He wouldn't just say, "You're wrong, you're dumb, get out of here." He wasn't there to embarrass them. He was actually there to invite them into a conversation. And he was there to challenge them in the way that they believe and maybe even the way that they're living their life. And it had a huge influence and huge effect on people, on young people especially. College campuses and high school kids were flocking to Charlie all over the place. And many believe that the election went the way it did because of Charlie Kirk, because he got the young people out to vote. So, but the way in which he interacted with people that were legitimately willing to listen and legitimately willing to be challenged was an incredible thing that I think we all can learn from, and to learn how he did that. And it requires a tremendous amount of humility, laying down our pride, being willing to say, "I'm sorry," being willing to say, "I forgive you." Those are some of the most healing words that we can ever say. "I forgive you," and "I am sorry." And so we need to be willing to do those sorts of things. And that pathway through all of that is the cross. It ultimately is the cross. And so we celebrate the exaltation of the cross, not because we like to look at gory things, but because Christ won our salvation. And when we humble ourselves and lay ourselves down and pick up our cross, that's where the rubber meets the road. That's where we pick up our cross. And that's where we bring people to know Christ. And finally, I know I've gone on forever, but I feel like the Holy Spirit was asking me to say something. So that's something. So finally, at the end of your pews, you have our stewardship renewal forms. And I ask you to take one and to fill it out. Each household, please fill it out. We're asking for your name, your number, your information. We're going to sell it on the internet and make a ton of money. So please, we have bills to pay. No, I'm joking. We will not do that. The purpose of that is that when we were calling people this summer to ask people about adoration, we found out that at least 50% of the numbers we have don't exist anymore or are wrong. So we need to update everyone's information. So please, please, please fill out that information so we can make sure that we have your updated information. That way you can get a call in the middle of the night from Father Brian. "I see dead people." Just joking. I won't do that either. I'll be sleeping. And finally, the time, talent, and treasure. We've been talking about this for 6 weeks or so. So please really consider how you can help out our parish and our community with your time, your talent, and your treasure. If something on that talent and time sheet doesn't fit your talents, write something in. If there's something we are missing in our parish that you would like to get started, don't come to me and say, "Father, why don't you get this started?" That's probably not my talent. If it's your talent, God may be asking you to start something. And so if you have something, a talent that is not honored in our time, talent, and treasure, write it in there. And maybe it's something that our parish needs to be doing, but it's also going to be turned on you to say, "How can you get this going?" I'm trying to run 5 parishes. I don't have time to start new programs, and so it's going to depend a lot on you. Not that I'm trying to run them by myself. Father Jesse and Father Gruber, of course, are helping, but I am responsible for the financials in all of them. The diocese isn't going to call Father Jesse and say, "Why are the financials in Oakley looking terrible?" They're going to call me and say, "Father Brian, why is Oakley broke?" Because it hasn't rained in 5 years, Bishop. That's why. But anyway, so please fill that out. Prayerfully discern where you can give of your treasure. We have salaries to pay. We have some phenomenal teachers in our school. If we encourage you to send your kids to our school, we'd love to see our classes completely full. What we do in our Catholic school is teach these eternal truths, this virtuous way of education, because it leads to Christ. Public schools, unfortunately, have kind of lost their way. It's not because of the teacher's fault. I know that our Catholic teachers and our Christian teachers do their best, but their hands are tied with the information that they are given and what they can and can't do in the classroom, whereas we are free to do those Catholic and things in our classroom. So we would love to be able to continue to support our teachers, support our employees, and so your treasure is important for that. So please give as you're able. I even challenge you, as I said last week, to maybe look at what you're currently giving and maybe increase 1% if you can. If it's been a rough year for you and you need to decrease, totally understand that. But when you get a pay raise or when things come back around, don't forget about us. And please give as you're able. So please take a few minutes to fill that out. At the end of Mass, somebody will be at the exits to collect them. There's also a stewardship fair in the basement. If you don't know what some of these things are and want to know what we do in the parish, go downstairs. There's tables set up with many of the organizations and groups and things that we do in our parish. If you need more information, go talk to the people standing at those tables downstairs in the basement. If you can't fill us out because you're just like, I don't know what the parish does, I don't know what the parish needs, take some time to go down there, visit that, and bring it back next week. And either drop it in the collection next week or drop it in the front of the box on the office next week. So please take some time to fill that out right now. I'm going to give you some time to do that right now. Please do so.